Millionaire's wife, humiliated a black CEO at dinner. Minutes later, he took her company. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You don't belong here, Kyber. The words sliced through the ballroom like shattered glass. Every head turned toward the sound. A woman in a gold silk dress, laughter dripping from her lips. Wine glass raised midair. The crimson liquid spilled in an arc, landing squarely on the chest of the man standing before her, a splash of red against his crisp white shirt. Silence followed, the kind that hums before thunder. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply exhaled, slow, steady, while the crowd began to murmur behind polished champagne flutes. The woman smirked. "Oh, don't look at me like that. It's just wine. You'll be fine." Her husband chuckled nervously, the kind of man who mistakes cruelty for charm. Around them, the dinner guests, billionaires, investors, socialites, shifted between discomfort and amusement. The man wiped his shirt once, calm as stone. His name, Elias Grant. To them, he looked like an uninvited stranger. No tuxedo, no name tag, no entourage. To himself, he was the quiet storm they had just awakened. He glanced down at the stain, deep red blooming across white cotton, and for a moment, he almost smiled. It wasn't humiliation, it was confirmation. He'd seen this scene before. The same tone, the same laughter, the same assumption that silence equals submission. From the corner, someone whispered, "Who invited him?" Another voice replied, "Probably staff." The waiter froze mid-step, eyes darting between them. Elias reached for his phone, not out of anger, but control. He pressed it to his ear, his voice low. "Stay on standby." That was all he said. The woman sneered. "Oh, please. Making calls now. To who, your manager?" A few laughs rippled through the table. Someone snapped a photo. The kind that goes viral before dessert. Elias finally looked up, eyes steady and sharp as glass. "You might want to delete that photo," he said quietly. She tilted her head, mock offense curling her smile. "Excuse me?" He didn't answer, not yet. He turned instead, scanning the room filled with people who saw status before humanity. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Elias. The maitre d' rushed forward, voice trembling. "Sir, please let's not cause a scene." Elias chuckled once, barely audible. "You already did." Then he walked to the nearest table, pulled out a chair, and sat uninvited, unbothered, unbroken. The red stain on his shirt caught the chandelier light, gleaming like armor. Across the room, Claudia Monroe, the woman with the wine glass, leaned toward her husband. "You see? That's what happens when you let anyone in." Her husband nodded weakly, unaware that in less than 10 minutes, anyone would own everything he had ever built. And for the first time that night, Elias smiled, not with warmth, but with certainty. Because tonight, silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Hours earlier, no one noticed when Elias Grant walked into the Monroe estate. It came alone, no entourage, no driver waiting outside, just a quiet confidence, wrapped in simplicity. A dark suit, open collar, no tea. The kind of attire that made shallow people underestimate you instantly. He blended in effortlessly, moving through clusters of chatter and crystal laughter. The dinner was hosted to celebrate Monroe Holdings securing a record-breaking investment deal. Ironically, that deal had been negotiated by Elias himself through a subsidiary the Monroes didn't even realize he owned. Tonight was meant to be his silent audit, to see how the people benefiting from his capital treated those they considered beneath them. He'd already seen enough in the first 15 minutes. A waiter bumped into a guest, got scolded loud enough to turn heads. A young woman in housekeeping tried to deliver flowers and was shooed away mid-sentence. Elias had smiled politely, taking mental notes, as if tallying debts owed in courtesy. Then she appeared Claudia Monroe. Blonde hair curled perfectly, laughter rehearsed like an expensive performance. She didn't notice him at first, not until her husband introduced him casually as an investor friend. Her smile stiffened, eyes scanning him top to bottom before she offered her hand, limp and delayed. "Oh," she said, voice coated with surprise. "You're the investor?" Elias nodded. "One of them." That pause, that tiny beat between her disbelief and her recovery told him everything. Dinner began. Wine poured like conversation freely, but not kindly. At the long marble table, Claudia dominated the air. Stories of vacations, of their success, of people lucky enough to be invited to their circle. Elias said little. He listened. That was his quiet weapon. Halfway through the second course, someone asked, "So, Elias, what do you do exactly?" He smiled, wiping the corner of his mouth. "Let's just say, I invest in potential." Claudia laughed, clinking her glass. "Ah, so, venture capital? Or charity work?" The guests joined her laughter, thin and nervous. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. He noticed how her husband, Richard Monroe, shifted in his seat, the faint shadow of guilt crossing his face. Richard knew. He'd signed the documents 2 weeks ago. He just hadn't told his wife that the man she was mocking tonight was the one closing in on their empire. And yet, Elias stayed quiet, watching, absorbing, letting arrogance reveal itself in real time. When Claudia finally spilled the wine, it wasn't the stain that caught him off guard. It was how familiar the laughter felt. He'd heard it before years ago, when he was just another kid in an ill-fitting suit pitching ideas to investors who couldn't see past his skin. Now he sat in their dining hall, a billionaire hidden in plain sight, letting their prejudice script its own downfall. Across the room, Naomi Chen, the PR director, sat silently. Her eyes flicked from Claudia to Elias, a flicker of recognition dawning. She'd seen his face once in a corporate report, in a photo captioned "Chairman, Grant Consortium," quote. But fear pinned her to her chair. The power imbalance was too thick, too loud. She stayed silent for now. Elias sipped water, not wine, his voice low enough for no one to hear. "Let the night keep talking. I'll answer in the morning." And somewhere deep in his calm, the plan had already begun to turn. The laughter at the Monroe table grew louder as the night wore on, the kind that tried too hard to sound effortless. Crystal clinked, violins hummed in the background, and privilege filled every inch of air like perfume. But beneath the surface, the atmosphere had shifted. The room wasn't laughing with Claudia anymore. It was laughing around her. Elias sat in silence, his shirt still stained deep red. A waiter approached timidly with a towel, whispering, "Sir, I can bring you another shirt." Elias smiled softly. "Leave it." The stain wasn't shame, it was evidence. Proof of what the world still refused to admit. Claudia raised her glass again, voice just loud enough for her words to travel. "I mean, honestly, these events are becoming so inclusive lately. You never know who might show up." Her husband shifted uncomfortably. "Claudia." She ignored him, her laugh echoing off the chandelier. "Relax, darling. I'm just saying standards matter." At that, a few heads turned toward Elias, curiosity replacing discomfort. Some guests whispered his name to each other, trying to recall if they'd seen his face in a magazine, a gala, or a quarterly investor brief. One man muttered, "Looks familiar. Maybe security detail?" From the back of the room, Naomi Chen stood near the service doors, phone in hand. She opened the company's intranet directory, typed Elias Grant. The search result loaded slowly, but when it did, her breath caught. Founder and CEO, Grant Consortium parent company of Monroe Holdings. She froze, eyes wide. She glanced at the head table again. Claudia was laughing. Elias was calm. And Naomi suddenly realized this wasn't humiliation. It was a test. Meanwhile, a young waiter named Leo accidentally bumped into a guest while clearing a glass. Claudia's voice snapped through the air. "Watch where you're going. Do they even train you here?" The waiter's hands shook. I'm sorry, ma'am." Elias looked at him, a simple glance, steady, kind. The kind of glance that says, "Hold on." Then Claudia did the unthinkable. She leaned back and said, Someone should really screen these events better. You never know when someone might sneak in for free food. Laughter. Polite, strained, but laughter nonetheless. Elias placed his phone on the table, screen face down, and said quietly, "You know, Miss Monroe, I used to believe money could buy class." Her smile sharpened. "And now?" He leaned slightly forward. "Now I see it only exposes who never had it." The room fell silent. Forks froze mid-air. Even the violinist stopped playing. From the far corner, Naomi's phone buzzed. A new message appeared. "Naomi, if you're in the room, stay calm. Watch carefully. E.g." She swallowed hard. He knew she'd recognized him. Claudia's husband finally intervened, his tone brittle. "Elias, perhaps we should take this conversation elsewhere." Elias smiled, serene. "No need. I think everyone should hear it." The staff stopped moving. Guests pretended to sip champagne but couldn't look away. Something invisible yet colossal had shifted power, was changing hands, quietly, elegantly. And in that golden silence, as the chandelier shimmered above their heads, Elias Grant, the man they'd dismissed, mocked, and tried to erase, began to reclaim the room without raising his voice. He glanced once at the wine-stained shirt, then at Claudia. "Funny," he said softly. "You spilled your power on me. I'm just returning it to where it belongs." The orchestra resumed, but this time, it sounded different, heavier, slower, like the score of a reckoning just beginning. At first, Naomi Chen thought she could stay invisible. She stood near the catering door, clutching her phone, pretending to text. But her pulse told another story. She could hear the whispers spreading like spilled perfume. Who is he? Did he just challenge Claudia Monroe? Should someone call security? Naomi's eyes darted toward the entrance. 2 guards had already begun to move closer. She knew how this would play out. A quiet removal, polite apologies later, and another story buried under laughter. Except this time, she couldn't unsee what she knew. Her screen still glowed with the words, "Founder and CEO, Grant Consortium." The man in the stained shirt didn't just belong here, he owned here. Across the table, Claudia kept her composure by force. Her cheeks burned with the uneasy warmth of arrogance, cracking under scrutiny. She raised her chin and said loudly, "If the staff can't keep their guests in line, we'll handle it ourselves." The guard stepped forward. One of them, a tall man with a silver earpiece, hesitated. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Claudia gestured toward Elias. "Escort him out. He's disrupting my event." Naomi's throat tightened. She looked around. No one moved. Everyone was complicit in their silence, staring but pretending not to. The orchestra's notes wavered mid-song. Elias didn't stand. He simply turned his chair slightly, facing the approaching guards with a calm that felt heavier than anger. He spoke softly. "You might want to confirm who you're removing." The taller guard frowned. "Sir, please." But Naomi's voice broke through before he could finish. "Wait." Every head turned. Even the chandeliers seemed to freeze. Naomi stepped out from the shadow of the catering station, trembling, but resolute. "He's not just a guest," she said, voice shaky but clear. "That's Elias Grant. He's the CEO of Grant Consortium and the owner of Monroe Holdings." Gasps rippled through the room. Claudia blinked, confusion flickering into disbelief. "What did you just say?" Naomi took another step forward. "You poured wine on the man who signs your checks." The silence was nuclear. Even the sound of a wine glass being set down echoed like thunder. Richard Monroe, the husband, paled. He muttered under his breath, "Oh God, Elias." But his wife's glare cut him off. "Lies," Claudia snapped, desperate. "That's ridiculous." She turned toward her husband, forcing a laugh. "Tell her, he's just." But Richard couldn't meet her eyes. His silence was confession enough. Naomi swallowed hard, steadying her voice. "Check the documents. The acquisition finalized last week. You sold your shares to his fund through a shell subsidiary." Elias finally stood. Slowly, deliberately. Every movement radiated control, the kind that didn't demand attention. It commanded it. He turned to Naomi, his expression soft. "Thank you," he said. Naomi nodded, barely able to breathe. Claudia's composure cracked. "You tricked us. You set us up." Elias met her gaze evenly. No, Mrs. Monroe. I gave you a chance to show who you really are. Gumsai. Behind them, the guards took a small step back, their posture shifting from authority to apology. Guests who'd laughed earlier now looked down at their plates. And Naomi, the witness who found her courage, stood in the center of that silence, realizing she'd just become part of something much bigger than a scandal. The orchestra began again, slow and uncertain, like a film's score finding its pulse. Elias adjusted his cufflinks and said quietly, "Now that everyone knows who's who, let's continue dinner." No one dared to move, because in that moment, power had changed hands not with shouting, but with truth. The air inside the Monroe ballroom turned dense, like glass about to crack. Claudia stood frozen between disbelief and rage, her knuckles white around the stem of her wine glass. The guests who once laughed with her now avoided her eyes' loyalty, evaporating under the heat of humiliation. Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. The room was already confessing for him. Claudia's laughter returned, brittle and forced. "This is absurd. You're telling me this man," she pointed sharply at him, "owns us? My husband's company?" Richard finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "Claudia, it's true." The confession detonated like a silent bomb. Gasps. A few whispers. One woman covered her mouth, eyes wide. "You sold it? Without telling me?" Claudia hissed. Richard didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the table, where his reflection trembled in the polished glass. Elias stepped closer, each stride slow, deliberate, the wine stain glowing under the chandelier's amber light. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," he said. "I came to see what kind of people would run the company bearing my name." Claudia scoffed. "You think one business deal makes you better than us?" Elias's voice stayed calm, even gentle. "No, but it reminds me how easily people reveal who they are when they think they're untouchable." She laughed again, higher now, unsteady. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Not yet," he said quietly. She took a step forward, her heel clicking like a gavel. "You think a few contracts make you powerful? You're just..." "Careful," he interrupted, voice low but lethal. The words hit harder than a shout. The room stilled again. And then the slip. Claudia spat the word that killed her reputation faster than any scandal could. A slur, sharp and ugly, cutting through the air like acid. It hung there, pulsing. The orchestra stopped mid-note. The servers froze in place. Naomi flinched as though struck. Even Richard whispered, "Claudia, no." Elias didn't react, not outwardly. He simply blinked, a single slow breath leaving his chest. But inside, that word reached a place memory never forgets. He was 16 again, a scholarship kid at an elite academy, standing outside the library in a too-big blazer, holding a book on economics. A teacher had said the same word when he asked to join the debate club. The laughter then sounded just like this one, thin, nervous, self-protective. He'd built empires since then, crossed oceans, sat on global boards, yet here it was again. Same word, same assumption. And for the first time that night, the calm in him hardened into steel. He turned toward Claudia slowly. "Thank you," he said. She blinked. "For what?" "For reminding me why I built everything I own so no one like you would ever have the power to decide who belongs where." Claudia's glass slipped from her hand, shattering across the marble floor. Naomi gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Elias didn't flinch. He looked around the room, his voice steady, almost solemn. "Every system has a breaking point," he said. "This was yours." Then he pulled out his phone, dialed one number, and spoke softly. "Carla, initiate Protocol Orion. Document everything, time, date, witnesses." A calm voice answered on speaker. "Confirmed, sir. The board is listening live." The words "the board" made half the room stiffen. Claudia's face drained of color. Elias pocketed the phone and glanced back at her. "You poured wine on a man you thought didn't matter. You just poured your legacy down the drain." The silence that followed was no longer shock, it was reckoning. And from the way Elias stood, still and unshaken, everyone understood. The storm had arrived. Claudia Monroe stood motionless, her gold bracelet trembling against the stem of another untouched wine glass. The hum of the crowd had collapsed into complete stillness, the kind that precedes the fall of something once believed invincible. Elias Grant didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power had already shifted. He reached for his phone again, pressed one button, and said with quiet precision, "Carla, open the feed." A beat. Then the ballroom screens, once playing a looping video of Monroe Holdings charity highlights, flickered, cut to black, and lit up again. A new logo appeared. A silver G intertwined with the name Grant Consortium. Gasps rippled like wind through tall grass. Guests looked from the screens to Elias, realization dawning like dawn breaking through glass. Claudia's voice trembled. "What is this?" Elias didn't even glance her way. "The end of your illusion." Carla's voice came through the speaker, crisp and formal. "Mr. Grant, all holdings under Monroe Enterprises have been officially transferred. You now hold 92% controlling interest. The transition was filed and cleared at 7:42 p.m. tonight." "Thank you, Carla," he replied. His tone was polite, almost gentle, but the weight of it crushed the room. Claudia's husband stumbled forward. "Elias, please, this can't be how." "It's exactly how," Elias said, his gaze cutting through him. "This was never revenge. It was accountability." Claudia finally broke, her words spilling like panic. "You planned this. You set us up. You—" Elias turned to her then, slow and deliberate, eyes calm as storm glass. "No," he interrupted softly. "You did. Every insult, every assumption, every word you thought would stay private, you wrote your own downfall. I just signed the paperwork." The guests shifted, guilt creeping through their luxury. Phones were lowered, eyes averted. The sound of silence had never felt so loud. From the back of the room, Naomi Chen stood tall, now no longer hiding behind trays and shadows. "Sir," she said, her voice clear, "should I inform the press office?" Claudia's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." "Ew." Elias nodded to Naomi. "Yes. Transparency first." Naomi tapped her phone. Within seconds, the ballroom's massive doors opened. A flood of murmurs rose as a few waiting reporters and photographers, previously stationed outside for society coverage, stepped in at the sound of chaos. Cameras flashed, light ricocheted off crystal and gold. Elias didn't look at them. He was still looking at Claudia. "You told me I didn't belong here," he said softly, every syllable a verdict. "But you were standing in a room built with my money, under my company, inside a name I allowed you to borrow." Claudia's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes darted to her husband, to the guests, to the cameras, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Elias turned to the crowd, his composure unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I apologize for the interruption. The ownership of Monroe Holdings has changed hands effective tonight. Business will resume under new leadership, one that doesn't mistake cruelty for sophistication." Naomi watched as several guests lowered their heads, a quiet acknowledgement that the hierarchy they'd worshipped had just cracked open. Elias straightened his jacket, the faint red stain still visible. "I'm keeping the name for now," he said, as a reminder that civility isn't about appearance, it's about integrity. Quote. He placed his phone face down on the table, the black screen reflecting the chandelier above like a seal on the moment. "Claudia," he said finally, voice almost compassionate, "you didn't lose your company because of me. You lost it because you believed people like me don't own rooms like this." And with that, he turned away, not with triumph, but clarity. Behind him, the cameras clicked, recording not a scandal, but a reckoning. The chandelier light refracted off every polished surface, scattering gold across faces that could no longer hide behind charm. The tension had shape, now thick, shimmering, undeniable. Elias stood at the head of the table, unhurried. His shirt, still marked with that deep red stain, looked deliberate, now a badge instead of a blemish. Every camera in the room had turned toward him, waiting. Every whisper had gone still. Claudia Monroe's voice cracked through the silence like a snapped string. "This is my dinner, my event. You can't just walk in here and—" Elias raised a hand. The gesture was small, almost courteous, but it silenced her instantly. His gaze was steady, voice low enough that the microphones had to lean in to catch it. "You poured wine on me," he said, "in a restaurant your husband doesn't even own anymore." The line hit like a cinematic explosion, not loud, but devastatingly precise. Guests drew in breaths that never left their lungs. Someone dropped a fork. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Elias continued, unflinching, "I warned you to delete that photo. You thought I was bluffing. Now, everything in this room, the art, the chandeliers, even the wine you wasted belongs to me." Naomi's phone buzzed. She looked down. Board confirmation complete. Transfer finalized. She exhaled in awe. The timing couldn't have been sharper if it had been scripted. Across the table, Claudia's facade shattered into something raw and trembling. "You think this makes you better? You humiliate me, you ruin my family." Elias shook his head. "No, Claudia. You did that the moment you mistook power for privilege." The press lenses clicked faster now. Every flash froze a new truth. The predator turned spectacle. The victim turned judge. Richard Monroe sank into his chair, gray and small. "Elias, please. There's got to be a way to fix this." Quote. Elias's tone stayed even. "There is. You start by teaching the next room you walk into that dignity isn't optional." He turned, scanning the stunned guests' faces painted with the silent fear of reflection. "To those of you watching," he said, "take a good look. This is what happens when arrogance meets accountability." A voice from the back murmured, "Is he serious?" Elias didn't turn, completely. Naomi stepped forward, trembling, but resolute, her voice steady now. "Mr. Grant, the board wants to issue a formal statement." He nodded once. "Tell them to wait. I have one of my own." He faced Claudia again. Her eyes shimmered with fury, her words desperate. "You'll regret this." Elias smiled faint, controlled, the kind of smile that holds truth behind its edges. "No, I'll remember this. You'll regret it." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, yet heavy enough to carry through the room. "You tried to make me small. You tried to make me invisible. But the problem with underestimating people like me, Claudia, is that we build empires in the silence you mistake for weakness." The cameras kept flashing, but it wasn't vanity anymore. It was evidence. Elias straightened his jacket and said quietly, "Dinner's over." He walked away from the table, the crowd parting like water around him. The orchestra, unsure, began to play again, slower this time, mournful yet grand, like a requiem for a dynasty that had just collapsed. Behind him, Claudia slumped into her chair, trembling as the reporters swarmed. Naomi followed Elias to the door, heart pounding, her mind still catching up to what she'd witnessed. He paused, just before leaving, turning slightly toward the cameras. "I didn't raise my voice," he said. "I raised the standard." Quote. And with that, Elias Grant, calm, stained, and sovereign, left the ballroom in silence so loud, it swallowed every apology that would never come. The ballroom doors hadn't even closed before the collapse began. Reporters flooded the marble floors, flashes slicing through the thick air. Guests scattered toward the exits, whispering in disbelief. What had begun as a dinner of elegance had become a public dismantling, and the Monroes were bleeding dignity in real time. Claudia's hand shook as she tried to gather herself. Her diamond bracelet clinked against her wine glass, still full, still red. "Turn off those cameras," she shouted. "This is trespassing." But the security team, once eager to serve her, didn't move. Their radios were silent. Their loyalty had already switched to the man who owned their paychecks now. Richard Monroe sat hollow-eyed, staring at the table as if it might rewrite what had just happened. The papers in his office, the signatures, the transfers, all legitimate. Elias hadn't stolen his empire. He'd simply finished the purchase his arrogance had allowed. At the far end of the room, Naomi Chen held her phone to her ear. "Yes, Carla," she whispered. "He's left the building. The transfer announcement is ready." "Excellent," Carla's voice replied. "Go ahead." Naomi stepped onto the small stage, near the string quartet's abandoned instruments. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice amplified now, strong and sure. "Effective immediately, Monroe Holdings will be rebranded as Grant Industries. All ongoing contracts remain valid. All staff are retained. Only the leadership has changed." The guests didn't clap. They didn't move. They just stared at Claudia, the once untouchable socialite now shrinking under the glare of the very spotlight she used to crave. Elias's voice suddenly filled the room through the overhead speakers, calm, recorded, unmistakably deliberate. To everyone in this room, it began. Thank you for witnessing the moment truth reclaimed its place. I built my company on respect. Tonight, you all saw why. The recording ended, leaving a silence so thick it felt like judgment itself. Claudia snapped, her mask breaking for good. He ambushed us. You all saw that. He humiliated me. No one answered. Even the orchestra, still seated, avoided her eyes. Then Richard stood, slow, heavy, and tired. No, Claudia, he said quietly. He didn't humiliate you. You did that the moment you forgot who you were talking to. Her mouth fell open, but no words came. Naomi turned away, her phone lighting up with messages headlines already breaking across social media. Clips of Elias's reveal were spreading faster than any PR could control. Number, dinner off downfall. Number, the man she mocked. Elias Grant. Outside, black cars lined the driveway, board members arriving for an emergency debrief. Inside, Claudia finally crumbled, dropping into her seat, as the weight of what she'd lost, and who had watched her lose it, settled like ash. She looked at her reflection in the spilled wine pooling on the marble floor. Red, distorted, broken. Richard whispered, "It's over." "No," she said weakly, "not yet." But even she didn't believe it, because just then, Naomi's voice returned over the PA, reading Elias's final directive. Effective midnight, all Monroe accounts are frozen pending review. The era of entitlement is officially closed. Gasps again. Someone whispered, "He's shutting it down." And outside the tall glass windows, Elias Grant's car pulled away, its reflection gleaming under the city lights. The man inside unmoved, unreadable. For him, this wasn't vengeance. It was correction. He'd seen men like Richard and women like Claudia his entire life, mistaking arrogance for leadership, cruelty for confidence. Tonight, he didn't destroy them. He simply stopped letting them win. Inside, the ballroom dimmed, one chandelier light at a time. What had been a celebration of legacy was now a museum of lessons. And in that fading light, the last thing Claudia saw was her own empire reflected in shards of glass, beautiful, brilliant, and gone. Morning light washed over the glass walls of the Grant Consortium Tower, clean, sharp, unbothered by the noise below. Elias Grant stood in his office, still wearing the same wine-stained shirt from the night before. The stain had dried into a dark maroon bloom across his chest. Like a mark carved into memory, he hadn't changed it on purpose. Some reminders needed to stay visible. Across the room, Naomi Chen entered quietly with 2 coffees and a tablet full of headlines. Number dinner off downfall was everywhere. Financial outlets called it the most public acquisition in history. Others called it a masterclass in silent power. Naomi placed the tablet on his desk. "They're asking for a statement, sir." "Everyone is." Elias took a sip of coffee, still calm. "Good," he said. "Then let's give them one." He walked toward the tall window, overlooking the city, the skyline gleaming beneath a pale sunrise. "You know," he said softly, "when people pour wine on you, they think they're staining your worth. But sometimes, they're just revealing their own." Naomi smiled faintly. "The staff downstairs, they're calling last night the quiet revolution." He chuckled once, low. "I like that. Quiet is underrated." She hesitated. "And the Monroes?" "Handled," he replied. "Their board seats vacated. Richard will step down quietly. Claudia will try to rebuild, but she'll have to start where she should have begun, with humility." Naomi nodded. "And you, sir?" Elias looked at her reflection in the glass, steady, thoughtful. "I'll rebuild too, but not an empire. A culture. One where people don't have to wear a price tag to be treated like they belong." He turned back to the desk, pulled a notepad closer, and began writing the words himself. "Respect is not a favor, it's a right. And silence, when rooted in self-worth, is not weakness. Each stratege." He handed the page to Naomi. "Send that to every outlet. No corrections, no spin." She took it carefully, almost reverently. "It's perfect." Elias walked toward the door, stopping beside a framed photo his younger self, age 23, standing in front of his first office, nervous but unbowed. "I built everything they mocked," he murmured, "and I did it without becoming them." Naomi glanced back, Curious, you don't seem angry. I'm not, he said. Anger burns fast. Legacy lasts longer. He reached for his jacket, still carrying the faint scent of the previous night's red wine and oak. Have the conference room ready in an hour, he added. I want the entire team there, no suits required. Just honesty. As she left, Elias looked once more out the window, watching the city pulse awake. Down below, headlines scrolled across digital billboards. The man she mocked now owns it all. Quote. He smiled faintly, almost sadly. I didn't raise my voice, he whispered to himself. I just raised the standard. And as the sunlight caught the edge of his reflection, the stain on his shirt glowed crimson, not as a reminder of insult, but as a signature of victory earned in silence. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, a new kind of power had taken its place, quiet, measured, unshakable, the kind that doesn't shout. It simply endures,